Welcome to Money is Freedom, a podcast exploring how finance and freedom connect in our lives. Created from thoughtful research and narrated by NotebookLm AI, this series brings you clear, meaningful insights into finance and beyond. Welcome to episode 13. Today, we're diving into the bold and controversial world of Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy. We'll explore how Saylor's unprecedented decision to invest heavily in Bitcoin has not only redefined corporate treasury strategies, but also sparked significant debate in the financial world. Is this audacious bet a visionary move towards the future of finance, or does it expose the company to unnecessary risks? Join us as we unpack the complexities of Bitcoin pricing, MicroStrategy's aggressive tactics, and what it all means for investors and the broader financial system.
All right, let's jump into another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at MicroStrategy.
Oh, yeah.
This company has been making waves with their pretty bold moves in the Bitcoin world.
For sure.
We've got a pretty interesting mix of sources for this one.
Cool.
Tweets, financial analysis, all sorts of stuff.
Nice.
Our goal is to try and figure out why exactly they're going all in on Bitcoin.
Interesting.
And what it could mean for the rest of us.
Yeah, it's fascinating. They're really kind of blurring the lines between like traditional finance and the crypto world.
Yeah, they're holding something like 1.3% of all the Bitcoin out there.
Wow.
Like if you think about that for a second,
Yeah.
that's like a massive chunk of digital gold,
It is.
as their chairman, Michael Saylor, likes to call it.
Right.
And he's a true believer.
He is.
And that's really driving their whole strategy.
Yeah, and it's not just about holding the Bitcoin.
Right.
It's about building a whole strategy around it.
Okay, so let's try to unpack that strategy a bit.
Yeah.
They're using these things called convertible bonds.
Uh-huh.
I'll admit, when I first saw that in the research, I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
But it's actually a pretty clever way to kind of fuel their Bitcoin purchases.
Yeah, essentially, convertible bonds let companies borrow money
Right?
that can later be turned into stock.
Okay.
So it's almost like giving investors a 2-for-1 deal.
Right.
They get to earn interest on the bond,
Okay.
but they can also potentially profit if the company's stock price goes up.
Gotcha. So MicroStrategy is using these bonds to leverage their Bitcoin buys,
Exactly.
and investors seem to be loving it.
They are.
They recently issued like $2.6 billion in these bonds,
Wow.
and that's more than they initially planned.
That's a lot.
It is. One of our sources, Fred Krueger, even tweeted that MicroStrategy now makes up like 4% of the entire U.S. convertible debt market.
Seriously.
Yeah.
That's huge.
It's pretty wild to think about, right?
Yeah.
But one source actually had this really interesting take. They were saying MicroStrategy is essentially becoming Bitcoin's investment bank.
Interesting.
They're raising money from investors, buying Bitcoin,
Okay.
and then their value grows alongside Bitcoin's price.
I see.
It's like they're creating this whole new kind of Bitcoin security
Right.
that's attracting investors.
And that analogy really gets to like the core of their strategy.
Right.
The key here is the spread.
Okay.
That's the difference between the cost of borrowing money
Right.
and the rate at which Bitcoin grows.
Okay.
So let's say hypothetically Bitcoin grows 15% annually, and MicroStrategy's borrowing cost is 5%.
Okay.
That 10% difference
Right.
is their potential profit.
I see. So in a way, they're betting that Bitcoin will outperform the cost of the money they're borrowing.
Exactly.
But that kind of brings up a question.
Yeah.
Isn't this whole strategy then reliant on Bitcoin continuing to rise in value?
That's a great question.
What if the price takes a dip?
Right. And that gets to one of the key risks of this whole approach. The source actually breaks it down this way.
Right.
They consider Bitcoin purchases as like revenue for MicroStrategy,
Okay.
while interest payments on those bonds and dilution from issuing more stock are the costs.
I see.
It's like a totally different way of looking at company financials.
It's like they're operating in their own little world where Bitcoin is king.
It really is.
But this is all happening against the backdrop of a bond market
Yeah,
that's facing some pretty serious challenges, right?
exactly. One of our sources pointed out that there's about $47 trillion
Wow.
stuck in these low-yielding bonds.
Really?
Yeah, and investors are looking for better returns,
Right.
but they're facing all these obstacles like regulations and risk aversion.
So Saylor believes Bitcoin could be like the solution,
You guys.
a way for that capital to break free
Right.
and find its way to like a more dynamic asset.
Exactly.
So he sees Bitcoin as this sort of escape hatch for investors who are tired of these low returns. But wouldn't institutions need to change how they view Bitcoin for that to actually happen?
Absolutely. Institutions are notoriously slow to change.
Right.
And there's still a lot of resistance to fully embracing Bitcoin.
Which brings us to the potential risks and criticisms of MicroStrategy's approach, right?
For sure.
I mean, not everyone is convinced this is going to work out.
Of course not.
Some are worried about Bitcoin's volatility. What happens if the price crashes?
Right.
Could MicroStrategy even weather that kind of storm?
Right. And there's also the whole issue of over-leveraging.
Okay.
They're using a lot of debt to buy Bitcoin.
Right.
If things go south, they could be in a tough spot.
Yeah.
And remember those convertible bonds we talked about? If MicroStrategy's stock price drops too low,
Yeah.
bondholders might not convert to stock,
Right.
forcing them to either sell Bitcoin potentially at a loss
Oh, wow.
or take on even more debt.
So it's like this really delicate balancing act.
It is.
And there are definitely some loud voices out there who think this whole thing is going to blow up.
Of course.
Citron Research, for example, they're betting against MicroStrategy. They think the company's overvalued and headed for a fall.
Right.
Okay, so we've got this really fascinating but potentially risky strategy playing out here.
We do.
But what does this all mean for, like, the average person listening?
That's the question.
Why should we care about MicroStrategy's Bitcoin adventure?
Well, it's a great question.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond just this one company or even just Bitcoin.
Okay.
It's about a changing landscape of finance.
Right.
And how technology is challenging the way things have always been done. You know?
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
It is a big deal. So MicroStrategy is like this test case, then,
It is.
for how far this can go.
Yeah.
If they succeed, it could open the door for other companies to follow suit.
Absolutely.
Imagine a world where corporations just routinely hold Bitcoin on their balance sheets.
Right.
They could use it for loans or other financial tools. It could change how businesses operate and even how we think about money itself.
It really could be like a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, if things go wrong for MicroStrategy,
Yeah.
it could scare off other companies
Right?
and investors who are kind of on the fence about Bitcoin.
So their success or failure could have like a ripple effect on the entire crypto world.
Exactly. Their every move is being watched by investors, regulators,
Wow.
everyday people who are just trying to make sense of all of this.
It's like they're walking a tightrope with everyone holding their breath.
It really is.
To bring it back to that investment bank idea, though,
Yeah.
this source also talked about how MicroStrategy's value is tied to Bitcoin's growth, which makes sense, but isn't that a pretty big gamble?
Well,
I mean, Bitcoin is known for its price swings.
it definitely is a bet.
Yeah.
And it's based on the idea that Bitcoin will continue to appreciate in value
Okay.
over the long term.
Right.
They're essentially creating this new way to invest in Bitcoin, one that's tied to the performance of a publicly traded company.
So for someone who might be thinking, okay, all of this sounds pretty interesting,
Yeah.
but what does it actually mean for me?
Right.
How would you explain the significance of what's happening here?
I think it's a sign of the times, really.
Okay.
We're seeing this collision between traditional finance and this new world of cryptocurrency.
Right.
MicroStrategy is right in the middle of it,
Yeah.
pushing boundaries and challenging the status quo.
Okay.
What they're doing could have implications for all of us in ways we can't even fully grasp yet.
Like, how specifically?
Like, think about those trillions of dollars we mentioned,
Right.
the ones that are stuck in those low-yielding bonds.
Yeah.
If even a fraction of that money finds its way into Bitcoin, fueled by strategies like MicroStrategies,
Right.
it could have a huge impact on the crypto market
Yeah.
and potentially even the global economy.
It's mind-boggling to think about the scale of that potential shift. But like you said, it's not without its risks.
Absolutely. There are valid concerns about Bitcoin's volatility, the potential for over-leveraging, regulatory uncertainty,
Right.
and, of course, the criticisms of MicroStrategy's strategy itself.
Like Citron Research shorting the stock.
Right.
And you mentioned earlier that their reliance on Bitcoin's continued growth is a gamble.
Yeah.
So what happens if Bitcoin's price just plummets?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
It would put their entire strategy to the test.
Right.
Remember, their revenue, as that source put it, is based on Bitcoin appreciating in value.
Okay.
A significant drop could force them to make some really tough decisions.
Yeah.
Like selling Bitcoin at a loss.
Right.
Or taking on even more debt to stay afloat.
That could be a slippery slope.
It could be. And it's something that potential investors in MicroStrategy need to consider very carefully.
Right.
There's a lot of upside potential, but also a lot of downside risk.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. From the technical details of their strategy to the broader implications for the financial world, what I'm still grappling with is MicroStrategy being incredibly innovative, incredibly reckless, or maybe a bit of both?
I think that's the question everyone's trying to answer.
Yeah.
There's no doubt they're shaking things up and forcing us to rethink how finance works.
It's like they're throwing a wrench into the gears of the traditional financial system and just seeing what happens.
Exactly.
And the outcome of this experiment could have significant repercussions for the future of Bitcoin.
You could.
And potentially the global economy.
For sure.
It's almost too big to wrap our heads around.
It is.
But as we're wrapping up this deep dive, is there one key thing you'd want our listeners to walk away understanding about MicroStrategy and this whole situation?
Well, I think the key takeaway is MicroStrategy is this fascinating case study in how the lines between traditional finance and the world of cryptocurrency are becoming more and more blurred.
For sure.
You know, they're challenging conventions and they're forcing everyone to pay attention to Bitcoin's potential.
Right.
For better or worse.
It's like they're a real world experiment playing out right in front of us.
It is.
And the results could have ripple effects we haven't even considered.
Absolutely.
As we're wrapping up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought.
Okay.
Imagine a world where MicroStrategy's bet pays off. What would it mean if their vision of Bitcoin as a mainstream asset actually comes true?
Imagine like those trillions of dollars that are currently sitting in low yield bonds flowing into the Bitcoin ecosystem.
That's a pretty powerful image.
It is.
It would be a massive power shift away from traditional institutions towards a more decentralized system.
Right. And that raises so many questions.
Yeah.
How would governments react to that kind of shift? Would they embrace it or try to control it? What impact would it have on global trade and economic stability?
It's almost too big to wrap our heads around.
It is.
But one thing's for sure, it would make for a pretty fascinating ride.
Absolutely.
Of course, this is just one possible future.
Right.
MicroStrategy could face setbacks.
Yeah.
Regulations could tighten, or Bitcoin itself could face unexpected challenges.
Exactly. It's impossible to predict the future with any certainty.
Right.
But regardless of what happens, MicroStrategy has already made a significant impact.
I think so too.
They've shown that it's possible to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
And that Bitcoin has the potential to disrupt traditional systems.
Their story reminds us that we're living in a time of incredible change.
For sure.
The future of finance is still being written, and that's what makes it so exciting. Right. It's a story that's just getting started, and one we'll be following closely. So keep your eyes on MicroStrategy, because the choices they make in the coming months and years could have a huge impact on the future of Bitcoin and maybe even the world.
I completely agree. It's a story you won't want to miss.
That's for sure. All right, that's going to do it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.